Emily's breakthrough came during a late-night experiment in her dimly lit university lab. As she pored over a microscope, studying samples from patients afflicted with the deadly virus, a pattern began to emerge. The rare virus she had isolated, long dismissed as harmless, appeared to be interacting with the pandemic virus in a way that drastically reduced its potency. "This is it," Emily whispered, a surge of excitement coursing through her. "If I can harness the properties of this virus, we may have a cure." Abandoning her usual caution, Emily rushed to compile her findings, her hands trembling as she typed furiously. She knew she had to act quickly before someone else made the connection. The race was on. The next morning, Emily presented her hypothesis to a panel of her peers, fully expecting them to embrace the potential breakthrough. Instead, she was met with a wall of skepticism and outright dismissal. "You're suggesting we intentionally infect people with another virus?" one of the professors scoffed. "That's completely unorthodox and highly unethical." Emily squared her shoulders, undaunted. "I understand the concerns, but the data is clear. This virus could be the key to stopping the pandemic and saving millions of lives." Another scientist shook his head. "Even if your theory is correct, the public would never accept it. Can you imagine the backlash? It's too risky." As the discussion devolved into heated arguments, Emily realized she was fighting an uphill battle. These were her mentors, the esteemed minds she had respected and admired. But in the face of a global crisis, their cautious adherence to convention could cost countless lives. Undeterred, Emily sought out Dr. Samantha, a seasoned epidemiologist known for her unconventional thinking and unwavering commitment to finding solutions. Samantha listened intently as Emily laid out her findings, her eyes widening with a mixture of excitement and concern. "This is remarkable, Emily, but you're right. The risks are enormous. The scientific community, the government, even the public, they'll all need convincing." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "I know, but I can't just sit back and watch the world crumble. We have to try." Samantha studied Emily for a long moment. Then a small smile played on her lips. "Then I'm with you. Let's do this." Together, the two women worked tirelessly, refining Emily's experiments and building a comprehensive case to present to the authorities. They knew they were up against powerful forces, not just the pandemic itself, but the entrenched interests of pharmaceutical giants and government officials who might see their radical solution as a threat to the status quo. As the death toll continued to climb, Emily and Samantha became increasingly convinced that time was running out. They had to act soon, before the world descended into total chaos. Finally, after weeks of painstaking preparation, they were granted an audience with the Minister of Health. Emily laid out her findings with precision, her voice unwavering despite the high stakes. Samantha chimed in with supporting data and a detailed plan for clinical trials and mass production. The minister listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When they had finished, he leaned back in his chair, a troubled expression on his face. "Your proposal is certainly bold, and the potential benefits are clear, but the risks are also substantial. I'll need to consult with my advisors before making any decisions." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped for a more decisive response, but she knew the wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, especially in the face of such a radical idea. As she and Samantha left the meeting, Emily turned to her colleague, a determined glint in her eye. "We can't give up now. Too much is at stake. We have to find a way to make them listen." Samantha nodded, her own resolve hardening. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do." The two women braced themselves for the fight of their lives, knowing that the fate of the world hung in the balance. As Emily and Samantha left the meeting with the Minister of Health, a sense of unease settled over them. They knew that their proposal, while potentially groundbreaking, would face fierce opposition from powerful forces with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the backlash to begin. Within days, Emily's research came under intense scrutiny, with prominent members of the scientific community publicly questioning her methods and the validity of her findings. "This is nothing more than a reckless and unproven idea," declared one renowned virologist during a televised interview. "We cannot risk infecting people with another virus, no matter how harmless it may seem. The consequences could be catastrophic." Emily watched the interview, her jaw clenching with frustration. She knew that her colleagues were not acting out of malice, but rather out of an abundance of caution. However, she also recognized that their skepticism was being fueled by something more sinister: the influence of the pharmaceutical industry. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily and Samantha began to dig deeper, following a trail of money and influence that led them straight to the doorsteps of some of the world's largest drug companies. "They're threatening to pull funding from any institution that supports our research," Samantha reported, her eyes narrowed with anger. "They're using their connections in government and the media to discredit us at every turn." Emily's hands trembled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Then we need to find a way to bypass them entirely. We have to get our message out to the public. They're the ones who will ultimately decide the fate of our proposal." Together, the two women launched a grassroots campaign, leveraging social media and alternative news outlets to share their findings and their vision for a potential cure. The response was immediate and overwhelming, as people around the world rallied behind their cause, desperate for any glimmer of hope in the face of the devastating pandemic. But the pharmaceutical companies and their allies were not about to let their grasp on power be challenged so easily. They responded with an onslaught of legal threats, smear campaigns, and even attempts to physically intimidate Emily and Samantha. "They're not going to stop until they've silenced us for good," Samantha warned, her eyes darting nervously around their safe house, where they had taken refuge to escape the constant harassment. Emily's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to be smarter than they are. We can't let them bully us into submission." Fueled by their unwavering determination and the growing support of the public, Emily and Samantha devised a bold plan to bypass the entrenched power structures and bring their findings directly to the world stage. "If we can't convince the authorities, then we'll convince the people," Emily declared, her eyes sparkling with a fierce resolve. It's time to take the fight to them. As they prepared to launch their audacious gambit, Emily and Samantha knew that the stakes had never been higher. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and they were willing to risk everything to ensure that their discovery had a chance to save it. The global pandemic had brought the world to its knees, and as the death toll continued to climb, people around the world were desperate for any glimmer of hope. It was into this atmosphere of fear and desperation that Emily and Samantha's message began to spread like wildfire. Through carefully curated social media campaigns and a network of underground journalists and activists, the two women were able to bypass the mainstream media's blockade and share their groundbreaking findings with the public. The response was immediate and overwhelming, as people from all walks of life rallied behind their cause, flooding government offices and social media platforms with demands for action. But as Emily and Samantha's message gained traction, they began to uncover a sinister conspiracy that threatened to upend everything they had been fighting for. "There's more to this pandemic than meets the eye," Samantha murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration as she pored over a stack of classified documents. "These numbers, these timelines, they don't add up." Emily leaned in, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "I think the pandemic may have been engineered," Samantha said, her voice barely above a whisper, "by someone, or something, that stands to benefit from the chaos." The implications of Samantha's revelation were staggering, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. If their suspicions were correct, then the global crisis they were facing was not just a natural disaster, but a deliberate act of sabotage orchestrated by a shadowy cabal of individuals with a nefarious agenda. As they delved deeper into the evidence, Emily and Samantha uncovered a complex web of corporate interests, government corruption, and a sinister plot that threatened to tear the world apart. They realized that the forces arrayed against them were far more powerful and ruthless than they had ever imagined. "We're up against something bigger than just the pandemic," Emily said, her eyes darkening with a mixture of fear and determination. "We're talking about a global conspiracy that could reshape the world as we know it." Samantha nodded, her expression grim. "And we're the only ones who know the truth. We have to find a way to expose it, no matter the cost." Driven by their unwavering commitment to the truth and their desire to save the world from the grip of this conspiracy, Emily and Samantha began to devise a plan to bring their findings to the global stage. They knew that they were treading on dangerous ground, and that their every move was being watched by the shadowy figures who stood to lose everything if their scheme was uncovered. But with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, Emily and Samantha were willing to take that risk. They steeled themselves for the fight of their lives, knowing that they were the only ones who stood between humanity and the forces of greed, corruption, and malevolence that threatened to engulf them all. As Emily and Samantha delved deeper into the sinister conspiracy they had uncovered, the threats against them began to escalate. It became clear that the shadowy cabal behind the pandemic was willing to go to any lengths to keep their scheme hidden from the world. "They're not just targeting us anymore," Samantha said, her voice trembling with fear. "They've gone after our families, our friends, everyone we care about." Emily felt a sinking sensation in the pit of her stomach. The weight of the responsibility they had taken on was becoming increasingly unbearable. They were risking not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they loved. "We have to turn back," Emily said, her resolve wavering. "The stakes are too high. We can't put our loved ones in danger like this." Samantha shook her head, her eyes hardening with determination. "We can't give up now, Emily. Not when we're so close to the truth. Too many lives are at stake." Emily knew Samantha was right, but the fear and the guilt were overwhelming. How could they continue their mission, knowing that the consequences could be so devastating? As they wrestled with this agonizing decision, a glimmer of hope emerged. A trusted colleague, a fellow scientist who had been following their work, reached out with a plan to help them circumvent the conspiracy's reach. "I've been working on a way to get your findings out to the world without putting you or your loved ones at risk," the colleague revealed. "It's a long shot, but it just might work." Emily and Samantha listened intently, their hearts racing with a renewed sense of purpose. If this plan succeeded, they might finally be able to expose the truth and save the world from the impending disaster. But even as they prepared to put the plan into motion, they knew that the consequences of their actions would be profound. They were about to challenge the most powerful forces on the planet, and the stakes had never been higher. "We're risking everything," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha reached out and squeezed her hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I know, but we have to try. The fate of the world depends on it." With that, the two women steeled themselves for the fight of their lives, determined to uncover the truth and stop the conspiracy at all costs. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they knew that they had no choice but to move forward, no matter the personal sacrifice. As the pandemic continued to rage, the world's leaders convened a global summit to address the crisis. Emily and Samantha were invited to present their findings, a glimmer of hope in the face of the seemingly unstoppable devastation. But as the two women took the stage, it quickly became clear that the conference was nothing more than a facade, a carefully orchestrated distraction designed to keep the public's attention away from the true nature of the conspiracy. "This is all a show," Samantha whispered to Emily, her eyes scanning the room with a growing sense of unease. "They have no intention of actually listening to us." Emily's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. They had been lured into a trap, and the stakes had never been higher. Undeterred, the two women launched into their presentation, laying out the evidence they had uncovered with meticulous detail. They spoke of the rare virus that held the key to a potential cure, and the shadowy cabal that had engineered the pandemic for their own nefarious purposes. But as they spoke, they were met with a wall of indifference and outright hostility from the assembled leaders. It was clear that their message was not welcome, and that the powerful forces they were up against had a vested interest in keeping the truth hidden. "This is absurd," one government official scoffed, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "You're suggesting that we've all been part of some grand conspiracy. Preposterous." Emily and Samantha exchanged a desperate glance, realizing that they were fighting a losing battle. The forces arrayed against them were too powerful, too entrenched, to be swayed by mere words. As the conference descended into chaos, the two women made a critical decision. They knew that they could no longer trust the system, that the only way to expose the truth was to bypass the official channels entirely. "We have to take this to the public," Samantha said, her voice low and urgent. "They're the only ones who can force the government's hand." Emily nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do." With the world's eyes upon them, Emily and Samantha launched a daring campaign to circumvent the censorship and misinformation that had been used to suppress their message. They used social media, underground networks, and a growing army of supporters to spread the truth, igniting a global movement of resistance that threatened to topple the very foundations of the conspiracy. But as they pushed forward, they knew that they were treading on dangerous ground. The shadowy cabal they were up against would stop at nothing to silence them, and the consequences of their actions could be devastating. "We're playing a dangerous game," Emily admitted, her voice tinged with a mixture of fear and resolve. "But we have to try. The fate of the world is at stake." Samantha squeezed her hand, her eyes shining with a steely determination. "Then let's show them what we're made of." With that, the two women braced themselves for the fight of their lives, knowing that the outcome would determine the future of the entire world. As Emily and Samantha's message began to spread like wildfire through social media and underground networks, the backlash from the shadowy cabal behind the conspiracy was swift and fierce. Realizing the threat posed by the two women's growing movement, the cabal launched a ruthless campaign to silence them and their supporters. They deployed an army of online trolls and bots to flood the internet with disinformation and propaganda, drowning out the truth with a deluge of lies and conspiracy theories. But Emily and Samantha were not deterred. Knowing that time was of the essence, they doubled down on their efforts, harnessing the power of the growing global resistance to amplify their message and reach even more people. "They can't stop us," Emily said, her eyes burning with determination. "The more they try to silence us, the louder our voice becomes." Samantha nodded, her expression grim. "But we have to be careful. They're not going to go down without a fight." Sure enough, the cabal's tactics quickly escalated. Activists and journalists who dared to share Emily and Samantha's findings found themselves the targets of intimidation, harassment, and even physical violence. The two women received constant threats, and they knew that their loved ones were in grave danger. Yet, even in the face of this mounting pressure, they refused to back down. They had come too far, and the stakes were too high. "We can't give up now," Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Too many people are counting on us." Samantha reached out and squeezed her hand, her own eyes shining with resolve. "Then we'll just have to be smarter than they are." Together, Emily and Samantha devised a bold plan to circumvent the cabal's stranglehold on information. They leveraged their growing network of supporters to create a decentralized, encrypted communication network that allowed them to share their findings and coordinate their efforts without fear of surveillance or interference. As their message spread through this underground network, the global resistance began to swell. Millions of people around the world rallied behind Emily and Samantha's cause, taking to the streets and social media to demand the truth and hold their leaders accountable. The cabal, realizing the magnitude of the threat, responded with increasingly desperate measures. They deployed security forces to crack down on the protests, using violence and intimidation to try and quell the uprising. But the people were not cowed. Inspired by Emily and Samantha's unwavering courage, they stood firm, refusing to be silenced. The movement had taken on a life of its own, and the cabal's grip on power began to slip. As the world watched in a mixture of hope and trepidation, Emily and Samantha knew that the endgame was approaching. They had come too far to back down now, and they were willing to risk everything to ensure that their discovery reached the world before the cable could destroy them and their cause. "This is it," Samantha said, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "The moment of truth." Emily nodded, her own resolve hardening. "Then let's show them what we're made of." With that, the two women prepared to take the final, most daring step in their quest to expose the truth and save the world from the grip of the conspiracy. As Emily and Samantha's message continued to spread through their underground network, the shadowy cable behind the conspiracy grew increasingly desperate to silence them. Realizing that the tide was turning against them, they deployed their most ruthless tactics, yet in a desperate attempt to maintain their grip on power. Operatives of the cabal, working in tandem with high-level government officials, launched a brutal crackdown on the global resistance movement. Peaceful protesters were met with overwhelming force, with security forces using tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition to disperse the crowds. Emily and Samantha watched in horror as the reports of violence and mass arrests poured in, their hearts sinking with the realization that their adversaries were willing to go to any length to silence them. "They're not just after us anymore," Samantha said, her voice trembling with fear. "They're trying to crush the entire movement." Emily's jaw tightened with determination. "Then we have to find a way to protect our people. We can't let them win." Undeterred, the two women redoubled their efforts, using their encrypted network to coordinate a series of daring maneuvers designed to outmaneuver the cable's forces. They directed their supporters to alternate routes and safe havens, helping them evade the crackdown and continue to spread their message. But the cabal was relentless, and they soon turned their attention directly to Emily and Samantha. Operatives began to close in, tracking their every move and threatening their loved ones in a desperate bid to force them into submission. "They're not going to stop until they've silenced us for good," Samantha said, her face pale with terror. Emily's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to be the ones to stop them." In a series of increasingly desperate confrontations, Emily and Samantha found themselves pitted against the full might of the cable's forces. They dodged assassins, evaded surveillance, and engaged in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, all the while continuing to push their message out to the world. The stakes were higher than ever, and the two women knew that the fate of the world hung in the balance. They had come too far to give up now, and they were willing to risk everything to ensure that their discovery reached the people before the cable could destroy them and their cause. As the confrontations escalated, Emily and Samantha found themselves pushed to the brink, their own lives and the lives of their loved ones constantly under threat. But they refused to back down, driven by an unwavering determination to uncover the truth and save the world from the grip of the conspiracy. In a final desperate gambit, the two women made a move that would either seal their victory or spell their ultimate downfall. The world held its breath, waiting to see if their audacious gamble would pay off and expose the truth to the world, or if the cable's forces would finally succeed in silencing them once and for all. In a dramatic turn of events, Emily and Samantha's daring gambit paid off. Their groundbreaking treatment, which harnessed the properties of the rare virus they had discovered, was finally approved for mass distribution, marking a turning point in the global fight against the devastating pandemic. As the news spread, the world erupted in a collective sigh of relief and celebration. The pandemic, which had brought the globe to its knees, began to recede, and people around the world celebrated the triumph of science and the power of ordinary citizens to overcome the forces of greed and corruption. For Emily and Samantha, the victory was bittersweet. They had endured immense personal sacrifices and faced down a relentless conspiracy that had threatened to destroy them and everything they stood for. But in the end, their unwavering determination and commitment to the truth had prevailed. "We did it," Emily whispered, her eyes shining with tears of joy and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Samantha pulled her into a fierce embrace, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. I never doubted you for a second. You're a true hero, Emily." As the two women basked in the glow of their hard-won triumph, they knew that the battle was far from over. The conspiracy they had uncovered was vast and deeply entrenched, and the forces they had challenged were not about to surrender without a fight. "We have to keep going," Emily said, her expression hardening with resolve. "We have to expose the entire truth and ensure that justice is served." Samantha nodded, her own determination renewed. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do. We've come too far to stop now." With the support of their global network of allies, Emily and Samantha set out to unravel the intricate web of corruption and deception that had threatened to engulf the world. They delved into the shadowy cable's operations, unearthing evidence of their involvement in the pandemic's origins and the subsequent cover-up. As their investigation progressed, they encountered resistance at every turn, but they refused to be deterred. They knew that the stakes were too high, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. In the end, their relentless pursuit of the truth paid off, as they were able to expose the full extent of the conspiracy to the world. The revelations rocked the global power structures, leading to the downfall of the shadowy cable and the prosecution of its members. Emily and Samantha's story stood as a testament to the enduring human spirit and the belief that even in the darkest of times, one person can make a difference in shaping the fate of the world. Their courage, their determination, and their unwavering commitment to the truth had saved countless lives and paved the way for a brighter future. As the world began to heal and rebuild, Emily and Samantha knew that their work was far from over. They would continue to advocate for systemic change, to hold those in power accountable, and to ensure that the lessons of their struggle were never forgotten. For in the end, their story was not just about a pandemic or a conspiracy. It was about the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of challenges, and the belief that a single individual can make a profound difference in the world.